Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Soldiers of Cinema podcast, episode 57. I'm Cullen McFater, and as per usual, I'm joined by my lovely co-host, Clark Coffey. How are you?
I'm lovely today. Yay!
I always use different.
Oh, that was so sweet. You always come up. Yeah, you come up with a new.
Nouns.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Lovely. That's one you've not used. Well, I feel so touched. Thanks, man.
There you go. I have to keep the spirits up.
Perfect. I appreciate it. Yeah, I feel so wanted on this podcast, Cullen. Thank you.
And today is a kind of almost like an unofficial sequel to last week's. I guess they're all unofficial sequels of each other, aren't they?
They are in our world. That's right.
In terms of the content and the subject matter of the film,
Tone,
I think you actually kind of spoiled it last week in the podcast, but we were doing Barfly, which is
I think that I might have. Yeah, I might have said.
I think you said last
the first
week,
time. Yeah.
And Barfly stars Mickey Rourke, Fay Dunaway. It's Barbet Schroeder is the director, who I had never seen anything else from. Robbie Mueller did the cinematography, who I have seen other work. He did Paris, Texas, and some work with Jim Jarmusch and things like that.
Lots of Jim's films. I mean, he's done. I almost want to say I think maybe half a dozen. He shot a lot of Lars von Trier's, or at least a couple of Lars films.
Yes, yeah, and then retired in I think the early 2000s and just recently
with Coffee
died.
and Cigarettes. Coffee and Cigarettes.
I think he died, or 2018. Sorry.
Yeah, sadly, but yeah, I mean, some really fantastic films. I mean, we'll get into it more, but just Alex Cox's Repo Man, Wim Wenders' Paris, Texas, To Live and Die in L.A., Friedkin. You've got Down by Law, that's Jarmusch. You've got Dead Man with Johnny Depp, that's Jim Jarmusch, black and white. Mm-hmm. Coffee and Cigarettes, I think, is also beautifully shot black and white film. That's another one of Jim's. Ghost Dog, which I actually love and have considered selecting at some point. That's another Jarmusch film. So this guy's got some heavy duty credits under his belt.
Yes, yeah, and he's a fantastic. I mean, he it's interesting, and I think we are going to be doing a lot of comparing and contrasting to our last episode with Fat City, just because not only is again the subject matter is somewhat similar.
It feels connected, right? I was right, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean they are, and they just even the atmosphere of them is very similar.
But
not only that, but I also think that Connie Hall's work on Fat City and Robbie Mueller's work on this, on Barfly, is actually very, very similar as well. They're both kind of like this gritty.
They definitely feel like related films. Well, so we're going to get into all that, but I'm happy that you saw that too, because it was kind of an intuitive reaction that I had. I had never seen Fat City. When I was watching the film for our last episode, that I just had this like intuitive. This was like, whoa, this film really, really reminds me of Barfly in a lot of ways, and I hadn't seen it in a while. So it was kind of this very vague. It was like kind of like the impression that I was receiving from Fat City tonally really reminded me of this one. But before we get into all of that nitty gritty, how I always like to start. And this
personal
is like
experiences.
and it's especially cool to me, right? Because I want you to go first, but it had been a while since I'd seen this film, but I saw this film, for the first time. It was released in '87. I did not see it at the theater at 11 years old. Who knows where it even was playing? Probably had a less than wide release, but I probably saw this like on HBO or something, 2 years later, right? So I probably saw this in like maybe '89 or so. Now, if you recall, I had selected Rumblefish for a previous film. Yeah. So this is now my second '80s kind of art film starring Mickey Rourke.
And with something to do with Francis Ford Coppola. Although this one is very, very vaguely to do with Francis Ford Coppola.
Yeah, so for anybody out there keeping score, if you're trying to put a beat on inspiration, like what's the theme of inspirational films for me? Well, this might help. But okay, we'll get into that later. So this is the first time you'd seen the film. I'm really curious to hear about your impression of the whole thing.
Yeah. So I've seen it twice now. I watched it 2 nights in a row just for preparing for this. But yeah, this was it honestly, like, I mean, and we've talked about this at length before, about how I really love movies that kind of are just like ambling, you know,
Mm-hmm.
plotless vignettes of like almost like a character study,
Yeah.
and I when we were talking about this before, I sort of said that it reminded me in a weird way, but there's even less plot in this, of like The Long Goodbye. It's
Mm-hmm.
very similar to Fat City. Sort of honestly reminds me a little bit of like some of PTA's movies as well, which isn't surprising.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure PTA has seen this, but like, for example, his most recent one, Licorice Pizza, which
Yeah.
again, thematically not very similar, but just kind of that like aimless, wandering, meandering plot about, and not, it's quite lighthearted, the whole movie. Like, there's nothing that is really, again, we talked about this last week too with Fat City, but there's nothing super depressing about it. There's nothing, like, it's not like they're living in great circumstances. The circumstances that they're
Yeah.
living in are pretty shit. But
And it could be sad, right? Like, this is another
you
one
could
of
easily
those,
do this as like a depressing,
right. I mean, it's like like your characters are all alcoholics.
Yeah.
Almost all of them are alcoholics. There's like total dysfunctional relationships. There's violence. There's, poverty. There's, I mean, these people are living in this totally depressed environment. These are totally checked out, unrealized, actualized, sorry, characters. And gosh, you could have done this in such a way that would have been one of those like Hallmark after school specials, like, see, boys and girls, this is why you should never drink alcohol. That's bad, okay?
And no, exactly. And that's what I mean, is that you could, like, so many of these movies that are of similar subject matter aren't fun to watch at all, because it's people with their lives falling apart, and they're, either drunk or constantly high or something in an apartment, and it's just miserable, and you're just kind of like, not that is a bad, not that movies have to be positive and fun the whole time, but there is something really charming about watching like 20 drunks in a bar just all, have this routine of like, oh, we're going to go outside and watch the fight again. And it kind of, the movie begins and ends in that exact same way, which, and it doesn't seem like it's looking down on the characters at all. Like it sort of begins and ends, it opens up and they're fighting. Eddie and Henry are fighting in the alleyway, and then it ends pretty much with the exact same sequence of shots, just kind of saying like, here's the cycle of life. And but again, it's not like depressing. It's almost kind of charming in a way. Like, these people have found their niche. Like, they've found their crowd. And no matter how many times Henry and Eddie fight, Henry's never kicked out of the bar. And, well, he is asked to leave at the beginning, but he's never like banned from the bar for life, even though Eddie and Henry completely hate each other.
And it's just to tag in here, and Eddie, of course, is probably Frank Stallone.
Yes.
Sylvester's brother's best role, I'm guessing.
Yeah. You guessed it, Frank Stallone, as Norm Macdonald would say.
And I just but I love that you appreciate that about it, because that's what I appreciate about it, I think, as well. So I mean, it sounds like, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it sounds like you enjoyed the film, just like
definitely,
on a fun. Okay, I was curious. I mean, it seems like a film that is pretty niche, at least to me, right?
Not super famous, not like super well known either.
I could easily imagine someone not getting this film, not liking this film, thinking this film is boring, or I mean, I could easily, if you said, hey man, I didn't get it, I didn't, this just didn't jive with me, I'd be like, yeah, I understand. It's probably got a very small audience, so anything else, like, what else stood out to you about it? I'm just curious. It's like, especially because I know, just from having talked a little bit about this before earlier, you don't have a ton of exposure to Bukowski. So of course, Bukowski wrote the script for this film. Mm-hmm. Bukowski was a writer well before this film. Some of you may know.
So he's and Mickey Rourke is sort of playing Bukowski's alter ego that takes place, kind of like this anti-hero of Bukowski's that is in a lot of his novels.
Somewhat autobiographical, but not entirely. It's kind of like a fictionalized, a pseudo-fictionalized kind of like alter ego, I guess, might be, but does contain a lot of autobiographical elements. Right. So, because I think, a lot of people might come into this film with the baggage of like, oh, this is Bukowski. Okay. But you didn't have that really.
No,
So
yeah. I mean, it's kind of, it's difficult to not know who Bukowski is. I mean, he's like he's kind of
At
like
this point.
Hemingway,
Patron saint
or
of, he's like the
any of
patron
these.
saint of drinking, of like drunk
Yes,
poets,
and like that kind of, that very classic 70s, 80s, like it's Barfly, really. I mean,
Right.
that's why it's called what it is. And so I think that the not knowing a ton, though, and not having read a ton of his work, and not really being all that familiar with Bukowski or how he was in real life or something like that, kind of it allowed me to sort of enter the movie with like a very blank slate, and to really enjoy Mickey Rourke's performance as well. I mean, he's like hamming it up, but it's so authentic to Bukowski. And I described it to you earlier as it's sort of, it's like kind of almost this cadence of like a Bob Dylan song, where everything's like "to my near friends," and it's like
that
he sort of sounds like
that's so funny. That, like that line is like. I mean, for people who like this film, that's like, to my friends, to all my friends, that's like you just like, that encapsulates this entire film in that one line, so it's funny that you pulled that out to use right now. Well, I'm curious about that. So specifically, let's talk about Rourke's performance. We're going to kind of jump all over as usual, everybody. So just hang on tight. But,
yes.
But you mentioned Rourke's performance. I mean, so obviously, his early work had a big influence on me, and it's one of the reasons why I picked Rumblefish. It's his performance in that film, which is so profoundly different than this film. He's so reserved and internal in Rumblefish, and here, like you kind of hinted at, he's kind of almost hamming it up. But you feel like it worked, right? Did you? Because it is. I feel like he really walks a tightrope there, right? Where it kind of is a caricature, but somehow the caricature still works. So your impression of that, what were you like when you first see Mickey Rourke kind of walk and talk on screen? What was your thoughts? Like,
I mean, it's just so charming. Like, you can't help but kind of think that it establishes the tone of the film very well, and it kind of goes back to how we were describing it, that it's not this depressing slog of like, these people with miserable lives. And I think a lot of that is owing to the fact that Mickey Rourke plays this character who is just so completely content with everything that happens to him. And like, and he gets into a knife fight with that guy in the apartment, and it's like, his reaction is like, oh, I hope he was alive. It's like, it's just this great kind of attitude about life. And
and he has heart, right? Like the guy, I feel like the role is played in a way where, I mean, I think that even though there's kind of this, I mean, I guess, existentially, right? For me, when I kind of look at this, I'm like, oh, this is such like this has something so beautiful to say kind of existentially, because the film, it's like, it just embraces the fact that life has a lot of suffering in it. But you can still find joy, even in that suffering. And it's almost like a Zen-like kind of examination of life, this film. Because it's like, well, so, it sucks to have a job. It sucks not to have a job. It sucks to, it's like life is just one, kind of bittersweet, if you're lucky, moment, and a lot of them are just pure suffering moments. But it's like all these little tiny pieces of beauty that Mickey Rourke's character is able to see in spite of all of that, or maybe because of all of that. So it's kind of like, well, life's suffering, but you can still find joy even in that. And so the character is never like, I'm out, like fully checked out, or like, I'm out of here, I don't want to live, there's nothing worth living for. Like, it's never any of that. It's almost kind of like, I'm on the outside looking in, life is surreal and crazy, you're all nuts, I'm nuts, but it's kind of funny, isn't it?
And we're all along for the ride.
And we're all along for the ride, right? None of us get out of here alive, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think he did a good job. That's kind of my feeling on his performance.
Yeah, and then, I mean, Fay Dunaway, I think it totally plays opposite Fay Dunaway's performance perfectly, because she, I think, plays it not like a caricature at all. She plays it super authentic and really grounded and kind of down to earth, and
more tragic.
Yeah, exactly. And yet she still is, say, at the same time, very, very charming and like very, even these characters that have such clearly very deep issues in their lives and things like that are still so enthralling and so fun to just watch. And I think that that's kind of the big thing and it's such a fine line to walk along. And I think it takes a lot of like a lot of talent to present a movie like this, where it can be really tough to explore these kind of destitute characters that have nothing going for them, that spend all day in a bar drinking and things like that, but at the same time still not make that exhausting to watch and not make that something that's completely, just again, this like miserable, depressing experience, but to take that and it is dependent on every single person that's involved, right? Like it's dependent on the director and how they portray the scenes. It's dependent on the actors and how they play the characters. Because again, if Mickey Rourke, I think, was playing this less heightened, if he was just playing this and he was just trying to like, authentically do it as just a kind of a regular guy and didn't have the cadence of Bukowski and that kind of speech pattern that he had and just sort of, played all these moments completely straight, I don't think it would really work. I think that the movie would be
bogged down.
Just it would just wouldn't work as well.
One of the things you mentioned, Fay Dunaway. I feel like I almost have this vague memory when I first saw the film, and I had it again most definitely when I saw it now. I'm like kind of shocked that she took this role. Like, seriously. So, I mean, obviously, she's a legend, right? Ever since, Bonnie and Clyde in '67, she's kind of been a legend. And, I think in the early '70s, she kind of, had a little bit of a downturn in her career. She didn't have any big hits. But then, before this film, you have, Chinatown, and I think, was it '74? You even, Sidney Pollack's 3 Days of the Condor in '75, which I think was a big hit.
And she kind of garnered, there's kind of a disputed
Patty
idea about her
Chayefsky's
reputation.
Right?
Yes,
you've got her, like, she's a movie star, dude.
Yeah.
Like bona fide, no holds barred, no question, like movie star. And I was just kind of surprised to see her in such a role, frankly. Like pleasantly surprised. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, definitely. And again, there was this kind of reputation around her that she was, again, it's disputed that she was tough to work with. Some people say that she was. Other people say that she was just super committed to, like, that. I think.
What were the stories there? I don't know too much. I don't know too much, like, from kind of that, like, People magazine kind of gossip rumor stuff. I don't know much about her. Kinda. What are the?
I know. I've heard like John Huston talk about her and say that, like, while she can be a pain in the ass, she's like the most dedicated, hardworking.
Well,
actor he's ever
Huston
worked
thought
with.
every actor was a pain in the ass almost.
Yeah, that is true.
So I don't know how much.
But yeah, he basically just described her that. Yeah, he said that she was hardworking and that no other actor he'd ever met had put in the amount of work that she did to her roles. It kind of reminds me, completely unrelated, but like of and I don't know if this is what Fay Dunaway did, but I know Sigourney Weaver, who doesn't have a reputation of being tough to work with, but I know that she like shows up to set with just binders and binders of work, like character work that she's done.
Yeah.
And so I can imagine that Dunaway's the same thing, where she's just kind of this. Apparently, she was very much of a perfectionist and very involved in the way that she was shot, not in terms of a. Like, a lot of modern actors say they can't be shot from below the chin or something to hide their double chin or something.
Well,
whereas she was very, very involved in like making sure that her character was represented on screen as she thought it should be, which is neat. I mean, it's fascinating.
And she might have had, so to bring a little bit of that into this film, I think it was an unscripted moment, as I understand it. That moment where she is in like her apartment building with Henry, Mickey Rourke's character, and we see a little leg there, and they're kind of talking about how she. I think that was something that she had asked to add, or just to something to give her character a little bit of glamour.
Yes. Yeah.
Because she obviously is dressed so down in this film, made to look so kind of, beaten down. But well, I mean, look, as an actor, you know, and this is like, I mean, I think every actor who's ever had any amount of success you have to deal with this and balance it. It's like you have to manage like you have to, I'm trying to figure out the words to say this. Like, you never know how you're going to be treated on set, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's so many moving parts to a film, but at the end of the day, like, you're the person in front of the camera. Like, you're what an audience is going to see. If the writing sucks, guess what? You look like crap. If the directing sucks, guess what? You look like crap. Right? If you're not lit well, if the DP doesn't do their job, and I don't mean lit well as in like a glamour shot. I mean, you're going to not look good, right? If other actors aren't performing well, like, you're not going to look good. So, I mean, if you're really on top of your game as an actor, which she clearly was, you have to pay attention to all that stuff, and you can't just leave it to chance, and you can't just always assume that it's going to be taken care of perfectly. So I think, really successful and actors who are really good at their craft understand a lot of the filmmaking process, and definitely work to kind of, if something doesn't feel like it's being done correctly, they step in and say something about it. And I guess, some other people could perceive that as being a pain to work with, but you have to, That's why you see people like, that's why, you see successful duos, like maybe, or, actor director combos work together over and over again. Cause once you you can actually trust that, okay, yeah, the film is going to be built correctly.
Oh, Herzog and Kinski.
And I don't have to worry that about all these other things, and I can just focus on acting. I don't have to worry if the film's going to be well directed or well lit or whatever. I can trust the other actors are going to be strong. The rest of the cast will be strong, et cetera, whoever they end up being. But anyway, not to digress too much here. But so I always take these rumors of like, oh, an actor was hard to work with. I mean, especially when they clearly have a lot of great performances. I always take that with a grain of salt, and I'm like, eh.
Well, I mean, it's actually interesting that Ethan Hawke had a really interesting comment on it recently, where he talked about how, like, the method, for example, how a lot of people have complaints about, the method.
Oh,
yeah. And he was like, he said that there's a level of, obviously, like, any actor is going to do their role the way they see doing their role, like the way that they best see doing it.
Right.
And that, that you can call Daniel Day-Lewis tough to work with, or because, he wants to be called by his character's name or whatever. But at the end of the day, I'm not going to be the one to go tell him to not do that because he's lauded as a fantastic actor.
Sure.
Right? Like, it's like
Proofs
the results speak for themselves.
Well, and the proof's in the pudding. And look, you've got somebody like Daniel Day-Lewis, where every performance is just, he knocks it out of the park. Then you get somebody like Jared Leto, who tries to do the same type of thing. And the proof is not in the pudding there.
Yeah.
Inconsistent, one could say, at best. He has had a couple performances that I think that were pretty good, but he's also, the bulk of his performances are not exactly outstanding. And he's he's another actor that's been, stories, all over the place about the wackiness that he's done on set. So yeah, I mean, ultimately the proof's in the pudding. But look, if the output is there, if the performance is there, hey, whatever gets you there, man.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah. So let's go back a little bit and talk a little bit more about the cinematography, because I know that's something that, it's a major focus for you. And kind of like Mickey Rourke's performance for me was, I think, the thing that really stood out to me the most, especially when I first saw this film. I didn't know who Bukowski was at all, by the way, too, when I saw this film at like 13 or whatever. I had no idea who the hell he was. So I think it was Rourke's performance more than anything that really stood out to me. But I know that, cinematography is one of the things that sticks out to you at first. Talk to me a little bit about your impressions there, your initial impressions.
Yeah, I mean, Robbie Miller, again, is this cinematographer who really just has this naturalistic sense, but is so good at heightening the kind of and accentuating like the natural look of a space or of just like an image using color or whatever.
Yeah.
You could so easily make the interior of a bar look really, really boring, because bars are usually not the most exciting looking places.
Yeah, not usually.
And
Yeah.
yet the way that they lit, where you've got this like overhead light that just kind of shines this green hue down on all the patrons, and it like looks like it's making them physically sick almost. And then the interiors of the apartment that are lit so just beautifully, so that they look like almost like portraits. The one shot of Fay Dunaway when it's kind of she's framed within that kind of door within the room, not the door, but the opening in the wall between the bedroom and the living room, and it's kind of perfectly square on that opening, that doorway, and she's just kind of standing right in the middle of it, and it's this long shot, and you can see her head to toe. And it's this really like, it looks like a portrait that you'd see in like a National Geographic on some, like portraits of life in downtrodden America or something, right? And so he's really, really an exceptional, like his framing is always incredibly well done. The way that he, frames an image and frames characters and lights them, is really, really serves the story, but it doesn't, overpresent itself. Interesting thing too is that they actually invented the Kino flow light for this movie.
Whoa, I didn't know that.
Yeah, so the bathroom moments, because it was tough to light the two of them and in this tiny little bathroom, because of course these were
shot on location.
They were real apartments, they weren't sets. And so they actually invented the Kino flow light, which, if you don't work in film, is basically just a more powerful, more consistent, and nicer looking fluorescent tube. So it's in the shape of like a fluorescent tube, and it can be inserted in those fixtures and things like that. And they're quite commonly found today on film sets, but back then they were, they quite literally invented them for this. So
imagine like a bank of like very high, I think what are usually, I mean, they're of different sizes, but like 4 or 5 in like a bank.
Yes, and you can kind of position them. They're usually quite thin, so that it's like a pretty easy light to position on a ceiling or something like that in a tight space. But again, I mean, I like that sort of thing too. I like it when a DP is sort of not only doing really great artistry with the images, but also furthering the actual technical side of it.
That's a wonderful piece of trivia.
That.
Yeah, I didn't. Yeah, I had no idea of that. And I just want to add, because you'd mentioned it, that the necessity that brought about the invention of the Kino flow was that they were shooting in real bathrooms. And I think I do just want to, because it's not just how something's framed or how something's lit, but it's the locations that you choose to shoot in that obviously have a huge impact on how a film looks. And it's one of the things that especially stands out to me about this film now. Having been and actually worked in very close to a lot of these locations where they shot down in the kind of MacArthur Park area of Los Angeles, it is just how like beautiful these locations are that they chose to shoot in. I mean, we're on location in LA. I think LA is such an important part of this film. The same way, Stockton in Fat City was such a vital part of that film. And had they chosen to shoot that in other locations, I just don't think it would have worked anywhere near as well. I think the same holds true for this. If you if you know Bukowski, you know that L.A. It would have been vital to shoot here in L.A.
And I just think it's such a fascinating, not only area, but the, like you said, that the incorporating location, and it almost kind of feels like this like vignette or tableau of like a time lost. This was made in 1987, and yet it feels very classic in its like sensibilities and in the locations, and it's all these run down apartments that were likely built in the 30s and 40s
or 20s,
or 20s, and it like this movie could very easily, if you just swapped out some cars and made them cars from the 30s, this movie could very easily be set in that era. And I think that's intentional, like this kind of era of this classical novelist who drinks a ton and is like so indebted into their work that they just leave society altogether and become this kind of, as the title suggests, this barfly. And so I think that that's something that's really fascinating too, and that I think that the location fits in so well with that, because as you described to me earlier, that these locations like MacArthur Park was a really kind of glamorous, beautiful area, and then
the
it kind of got really
10s,
run
20s,
down, right?
in the 10s, 20s, 30s. Yeah, like the Westlake, MacArthur Park area, which just, for people who aren't super familiar, it's kind of it's a little bit west and north of the downtown of Los Angeles, which it doesn't have much going on now. And it's kind of, south and east of Hollywood, I guess, if those, so it's kind of, it's just a little bit over east from central LA.
Is it sort of near Silver Lake?
It is south. So
okay, south of okay.
It's almost mostly directly south of Silver Lake, but
right.
But today it's an area. It's a high crime area. Basically, yeah, there were really beautiful high end luxury apartment buildings or condos that were built here, and that's a lot of that architecture that you see, right? That kind of, you can tell that they're used to, which I think is so beautiful to this film, that there's like a royalty in exile feeling almost, that there's like, you can sense that there was once something there and now it's been let to rot, or time is kind of, is disintegrating these things, which is kind of what's happening to all these characters, right? Time and drink
is glamour is exited. Yeah.
And right. But you can still sense though, that there's like, there's like this royalty and exile kind of feeling, like that Mickey Rourke, almost has this like untouchable part about his character that's kind of royalty, and Fay Dunaway most definitely does, right? And so it's such a beautiful symbolic use of the location. But yeah, I think like most of the money, is my understanding that people kind of started to migrate west.
Right.
And so you get Beverly Hills, Brentwood, etc. So a lot of people who had money, who would have been living in these very expensive locations in the teens, 20s, 30s, maybe 40s, they left. And then, unfortunately, this area became a very high crime and sadly low income and high poverty level area. So yeah, and
there's just something really. I mean, I always find a location that is storied and that has history to it, even if it's made up for the movie. But seeing, a rundown apartment building that clearly has a lot of history to it is deeply, deeply more interesting than just being presented a, world of rubble, or like a, that there's this kind of this middle ground, like you said, where it's like clearly this area was glamorous back in the day, and the area perfectly encapsulates the people that now live there, which is all these kind of like people who have kind of reached a dead end and just spend their nights in these bars that back, 40 years ago probably had some pretty high profile people coming in to see jazz shows. And and so it's just deeply fascinating. It's like the people that kind of time left behind in a way.
Yeah. And I it's such a beautiful use of, like I said, like I think you're kind of hinting at like a world building, and whether you use something that's pre-existing, or you create something like, a movie like Blade Runner, which of course is a film that used production design to create such a beautiful world that was so integral to the story. It kind of reminds me, do you know what it kind of reminds me of? Like the interiors in this film, which are real interiors. They weren't dressed up, is my understanding. So these you look at the interiors of these apartment buildings and you're just like, how in the world could anybody live in something like this? Sadly, it seems like people really did, that those were real places. What it kind of reminds me of is the interiors in a lot of the interiors especially in the beginning of Leon, the Professional. Where Natalie Portman's building. Remember that? The texture, it's almost like Luc Besson was like trying to recreate almost, I could imagine like the texture in this film and the interiors in this film. I don't know, that just like jumped out at me. I was like, gosh, that's another film that the texture seems so similar.
Yeah.
So I don't, so for somebody who loves Los Angeles and loves Los Angeles history, that was one more thing for me that really jumped out at this film, is how LA this film feels,
Yeah, it's sort of like how when we were doing the Fly, and I said that it's difficult to describe to someone who doesn't live here, but The Fly just feels so Toronto.
Oh yeah, there was
And
another an enemy, or no? What was the?
yeah, Enemy as well. Yeah, Enemy. The Denis Villeneuve. Yeah.
Yeah, because I think you said the same thing there, and I think, and that's just something that's like, well, hey, you're obviously you live in Toronto, and that speaks to you very personally. I think for people who have a love for Los Angeles or who live in Los Angeles, this film has the potential at least to do the same, even though I don't live in these areas. I have worked in a lot of these areas, but just in general, yeah, I kind of have this huge affinity for like real LA films, that were shot on location, and that really accentuate and highlight the city.
Yeah.
I think when I was a kid, I probably watched this and I was just like, whoa, like, what is this world? Like.
And so you said you didn't see it in theaters. You
Nope.
you must have watched it on like a
TV.
television.
Yep,
Yeah.
yep. I watched it on. Yep. So I watched it chopped and cropped, and on HBO or something. When I was a kid. But here I am, like living in Missouri. So imagine, it's like I'm,
Yeah. It's like
13,
the mystical land
14-year-old
out
kid.
west.
Yeah, and I'm like living in Missouri, and I'm like suburban, and tract house. I mean, just imagine the most suburban, homogenous environment you can possibly imagine. And then, a movie like this pops up and I'm like, what? My little brain is like, what? What is this world? Who are these people? And it's just mesmerizing, to kind of see such a radically different way of living and thinking and existing, which was something that I feel like I really got, I looked for that so much in films or from films when I was a kid. And I think that's exactly why, because my real life was so homogenous and safe that to get to experience other ways of existing and other places, this was like my window into that,
Yeah. Yeah. And it's not like even, the movie doesn't explore like crime or anything like that either.
No.
It just kind of, the worst thing that happens in this movie that involves the police is that they steal some corn. But
which is so crazy. Like,
yeah.
It's like, how random was that? I'm curious, like when you were watching it, you're just like, where the hell does corn grow in LA? Like that was my first thought. I was like, okay, this film's not taking place in the 10s, the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, when there was agriculture in Los Angeles. This is taking place in 87. What the hell is there a corn patch doing here? Like,
Yeah, this random parking lot corn patch. Yeah.
And if you watch,
even just the way that like the police respond to that and the paramedics, like all of these different characters are just so.
Oh, the paramedics crack me up. Oh, wait, can we stop? Let's talk. Like, so the paramedics are hysterical, by the way.
Yeah, but it doesn't almost feel like it feels kind of like a Seinfeld bit at that point, like in a good way, where it's like you've got these paramedics that keep showing up, and when they show up again, and he's like, "What
like
are you
that
guys
guy's
doing
always
the
got
morning shift and the night shift?"
Yeah, the guy's always got it like a cigarette in his, like that one guy's got sunglasses on, I think, or something, right?
And his like collar's popped, yeah.
His collar's popped, and they're just it's the same paramedics that come in like 2 or 3 times during the film. It cracks me up. And that's what there is definitely humor and a lot of it in the film, I think.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And that's definitely and I think you really, you hit the nail on the head. The film is clearly not judgmental about its characters, and it doesn't look down on their characters. And it doesn't have pity. It's not like, these poor characers.
Which a lot of movies that deal with kind of this type of poverty these days do. Like I won't name any specifics names. just to not to speak ill of modern filmmakers. But,
you can speak ill. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's true.
We can speak
but
ill.
I just noticed that there's like I guess I'll say one for like Nomadland, for example, just because it was so big last year.
Yeah.
Like that seems to have like just a ton of like pity and almost just like patronizes all of
I don't
its
think
characters.
I've seen it. I don't think I've seen that one.
Yeah, it just kind of deals with poverty in a very like, oh my goodness, like how these poor people. And same with there was one that Ron Howard did last year too. I can't remember what it was called. Hillbilly Elegy, I think. Oh, and again, it just kind of takes this like this just patronizing look at like any poverty. And whereas this, to me, this kind of really lines up with what I know about Bukowski's sensibilities, which is if you were to present this life to like an upper middle class or upper class, Beverly Hills, Pacific Palisades type of person, and show them this, they would be like horrified. They'd be like, "Oh my gosh!" And yet Bukowski's like, "Hey, if you don't laugh, you cry." Like,
well, and he's like,
all
"Hey, I wouldn't take your life if you gave it to me."
Yeah, exactly. Like it's like this to me is all. It's one of those things where it's like it's almost like telling a low end joke at like a high class dinner party, where you just nobody at the party is gonna get it because they just don't. They don't look at life that way, whereas money is like all that's important to them, and having, this shelter and things like that. Whereas this guy's just kind of like, Henry just has no, he's just going to float where he floats and figure out things as it comes at him, right?
And let's be honest, like, well, first of all, too, I mean, maybe it goes without saying. I don't know. I'll say it though. But I mean, Bukowski really was an extraordinary writer and especially poet. And it's clear that that he had, there was a lot more there than just, somebody who got drunk and got into fights or whatever. I mean, nobody can write the way he wrote and not be filled with something really extraordinary. His humanity was huge. And that's just because there's just no way it couldn't be, because you read a lot of his writing and it's just some of the most beautiful stuff I've ever read. I highly recommend you check out his poetry, especially. I think his novels are worth a read too, but just especially his poetry is really, there's some extraordinary beauty, and that, people are always, I guess it's always interesting, or people are kind of fascinated that so much beauty can be, I don't know if hidden is not, hidden's not the right word, but
it's almost like you can, like, there is beauty to be found everywhere.
There's beauty to be found everywhere, and somehow people are surprised by that. I don't know why. But so that's part of this story, and I think this is part of this film, and it's trying to convey that symbolically, that the beauty of his poetry, even though his poetry is kind of about these quote unquote low life things, or that day to day life, and living on Skid Row, or being a drunk with no job or whatever, but there's still all this beauty and wisdom and heart. But I was just trying to say, there's a lot of truth here too, right? I mean, a lot of like what he says about this film kind of says about life isn't maybe wrong. Maybe they're onto something, that, killing yourself 60, 80 hours a week to make some paper, maybe it's not the end all be all of the world.
Oh, absolutely. I mean,
I guess they might not be wrong.
Personal, there's an element to which so many people, when because I of course just got back from this 3.5 month trip this summer.
Yeah.
And, a lot of people were like, well, why wouldn't you put that money away? And then, you could save up and and it's like, I'm not living my life to slave away in a cubicle for, until I'm 70 and then have, maybe 10, 15 years to myself. Like,
right.
I'm going to enjoy the things that I want to enjoy as they come to me.
And you also saw, and I'm guessing that you also were exposed to, because again, not to put words in your mouth, but you grew up like middle class, nice safe place in Canada and Toronto, just like I grew up middle class, nice safe place in Missouri. You got to see how a lot of different people in a lot of different countries live.
Yes, yeah.
And a lot of different people in a lot of different countries with a lot less material wealth than we might have in Canada and the United States.
Yeah.
Some of us, certainly not all of us, but so yeah, I'm curious. Did you feel any kind of resonance with that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, poverty. I think the way that the Western idea of poverty is very interesting, because so often it's almost individualized in a way, and we're getting very, very philosophical here for a moment, but
that's okay.
It's always sort of weirdly individualized. Whereas what I noticed overseas was that the kind of if someone was really, really, really poor, they were always still with their family. They were always still living with their family, and they always seemed like there was a lot of just like happiness built into that. And I almost kind of see this as Bukowski kind of linking those two ideas, which is just that, like, we have obviously such all over the world, there's such a focus on money and income and things like that. And obviously those things in the system that we live in are important. You can't eat without income. But perhaps, it's kind of maybe just a little bit of a unfalsifiable hypothesis in a way of saying, like, well, what if that didn't matter? Like take a look at these people who don't have a lot and yet they're completely content with it. And not to say that you should be happy with, getting scraps, but rather that, like you said, that there's...
Well, you're not trying to romanticize poverty.
Yeah, there's
you're not trying to be found
everywhere, and that.
But there's... But I just wanted to add, because you, as we kind of talk through some of these things, it kind of makes me think of more. It's, I think what the film is trying to say in some ways, maybe, and again, it's like not trying to romanticize alcoholism, because that's obviously clearly a very serious disease that affects a lot of people in really horrible ways, and not just the sufferers of alcoholism, but their families and friends and their communities. I mean, that's not a joke, and that's a serious, real thing. Not that I'm trying to have some disclaimer here. I'm just saying there's other facets and kind of viewpoints to look at this through or from, and that is one of them. But that there's kind of, it's almost like, I'm just kind of thinking existentially a little bit, which this film kind of makes me do, is like, it's almost like, yes, there's this suffering. If we take it out of just the literal of like, okay, they're drunks and they're living their lives in bars, but life is kind of suffering, and some of us are alienated, but you almost maybe have to kind of embrace that to hold on to your soul, to keep from so fully selling out that because it's...
hey, I've
to become a suit, because you do have to, there is kind of a decision that has to be made for most of us, unless you're somehow born into wealth. It's like, and maybe this is what speaks to me on a personal level, where it's, I made a conscious choice at about 30 years of age. It's like I had a very comfortable existence. I lived in a nice, apartment, and I made a good living. I had good insurance, and I was like, I feel completely empty inside when it comes to what I'm doing with my life. This is miserable. There's no purpose here. I'm dying on the inside, even though I have all of these wonderful things externally. I bought like this fun sports car convertible and whatever, right? It's like what I'm spending my life doing, this is just, and it's not that I was doing something horrible, right? It was just not a match for me. It wasn't a fit for me. And I made the conscious choice, I'm going to do something where it's extremely unlikely I'm going to make a good living at it, but I am willing to risk being destitute, and really struggling financially, in order to pursue something I actually care about. Yeah. And I think that's definitely one of these underlying threads, which is like, and I think that's part of Bukowski's life too, is just that, look, I'm here to write, and I want my time to write. I don't want to go
and like where I do that, I don't care.
And I don't want to work a 9-to-5 job, and I don't care about cars and name brand clothes and a fancy house and all this kind of stuff. I want to write, and I'm willing to pay for that time to write by foregoing all these other things, because they don't mean anything to me anyway. Yeah. So I don't know. I understand that. And I think there's a lot of value there.
It goes back to the kind of idea of traveling too, where it's like I met the two sides of that coin while I was away, where there was some people who it's like, oh yeah, I take 2 weeks of the year to travel, and then I'm like hard at work, business, like venture capitalists and things like that. And they're all like, yeah, I do that, and then I come travel, and like that's my routine. Whereas on the other hand, you have people who literally just, it's like, hey, I do odd jobs where I am and make enough money to get to the next place. Yeah. And it's like they're all,
you either live
those
to
people
work
always
or work
seem
to
much
live.
more relaxed and much more happy with their lives. And like I know people who work decades at places and then they get laid off, and it's like, yeah, you were just a number at this company. It's in what now, right? What do you do? And so I've never exactly. I mean, I sort of made a similar decision. Not that I was in a place of, I didn't have like a great job or anything, but when I was at school, I went to U of T for a year and was doing fine and was enjoying classes in a kind of academic sense. But I also had to make the decision to myself where I was like, do I want to spend 4 years doing this, spending money to do this, and get a job that I can get with a degree that I will never enjoy, just to make sure that I have like a steady income? Yeah. Or do I want to actually pursue the thing that I believe will make me happy? It's kind of the quantity versus quality idea, right? Like I would rather live 10 really, really happy years of my life and then disappear. I'm saying, I'm not going to say die, but in terms of this hypothetical question, versus spend 80 years kind of, like you said, slaving away and in a 9 to 5 and hoping that by the time I graduate, by the time I retire, I have enough money put aside to actually do things that I enjoy. Money or energy too, right? Or even how many people die at their desk from a heart attack at 55, and it's like,
right?
Geez,
yeah, none of us is guaranteed any amount of time or any comfort or anything else, regardless of what you have. And so, to put all your eggs in the basket of security, you might be sadly surprised that even when you do put all your eggs in that security basket, you still don't have it. Yeah. Life is fragile, and life always involves suffering, and it's your choice to either embrace it or try to run away from it. But I don't think you can outrun it. But on that note, on that happy note,
yes,
life is suffering. No, but life is suffering, but that doesn't mean that you can't still find joy even in that. All right.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Cullen, thanks again, as always, man, for a wonderful conversation. I'm happy that you liked the film, man. That always makes me happy. I'm glad that you enjoyed it. I'm glad that I was able to share one of my favorites from my childhood with you, and hopefully with our listeners here. If you've not watched it and you've somehow still made it to the end of this hour-long podcast and you've not watched it, it's still very well worth watching, even after having heard a lot about it from us. It's because plot, it's not like there's any spoilers for this film.
Yes,
there's no plot, so there's no. It is spoiler proof, which is fantastic. All right, well, until next time, everybody, thank you so much. Cullen, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Take care, everybody. Until next time. Bye bye.